Hi everybody, Doug here. This is first of what I hope to be a 3-part video series, and I think we're going to try to do this with multiple people because I think it's going to be a good learning opportunity for both you and myself as a newly certified TPI instructor. So this is my client, Pat. What we're going to do here is we're going to look at his swing. I'm going to talk about the results of his physical assessment as part of the TPI body swing connection protocol. We're going to basically look at his swing. We're going to talk about the findings from his physical assessment. We're going to try to identify some of the faults in the swing and connect it with things that we found in the screening. In the second part of this video, we're going to do, or I'm going to show the actual exercises that we've given him to work on his mobility, balance, range of motion, and all those kind of things. So that aspect of the body swing connection. And then in the third video, we will show some of the swing drills that we've provided to work on this stuff from that perspective. So this should be a really comprehensive method of showing how the TPI program works and also talking about how we can hopefully help Pat improve his swing. So Pat is a client. He is a former soccer player, really good athlete, has had multiple different injuries, and so there are quite a few things limiting his mobility and range of motion and balance. So I'll begin by talking about those, then we'll show the swing at full speed, then we'll draw some lines to go over things. So first thing I would say is in terms of our physical assessment, some of the biggest things that we found were, well, as follows. I'll start with the lower body. So Pat has some limited internal mobility or internal hip mobility, both left and right. So when he turns to the right during his backswing, his ability to do that effectively is limited. And then on the downswing, he has limited internal mobility into his left hip. So he's kind of limited in both directions, and you'll see that he has a very upright swing, I think, in part as a result of that. His overhead squat was actually pretty good. He has good ankle mobility. He was able to keep his hands in a pretty good spot as on the way down. So that's actually a really hard test, and he did a great job there. What we noticed is that his balance is actually fairly limited on both sides. So when you're doing a TPI assessment, you basically have somebody stand on one foot with their eyes closed, and you count how long they can maintain that posture. Good, or PGA level would be 15 seconds or above. Pat was less than 5 seconds on each side, so his balance is definitely impaired in the lower body bilaterally, and he's got that limited hip mobility. So those were the two biggest things from the lower body perspective. Now with his upper body, Pat has quite a few issues. The first was the overhead lat test. So basically with that test, you are having your client basically press against the wall in a semi-squatted position and try to touch the wall behind them. So they reach their arms up, keeping their arms straight, and they try to touch the wall. Pat was unable to get to his nose. So that means his lats are limiting his ability to keep his arms overhead, and that can impact your backswing. And again, we'll show that in the swing analysis that follows. The other things that we saw is very limited internal rotation of the shoulder. So basically you'll have client stand with their arms out at 90-90, so kind of it'll look like their arms are out to their side and then their hands are pressed forward, and they'll try to rotate their arm backwards with the goal of having it match up with their spine. And Pat was unable to do that, and he was a little bit worse in the golf posture. So you do it standing and then you'll do it in the golf posture, and he was really limited in that on both left and right sides. That can directly lead to things like needing to use different planing mechanisms when bringing the club in the backswing and the downswing, and you'll see that can result in some things like standing up, early extension, flat shoulder plan, etc. Pat also has quite limited wrist hinge, meaning like if you were standing there with your thumb pointing towards the sky, can you flex your wrist towards you? He has very limited there, and then his wrist extension on both sides is very limited as well. So that's your ability. If your palm was facing the ground, can you extend your knuckles towards the sky? That is another important aspect of getting the club into a powerful position and getting the club on a good plane coming down. So at a high level, those are some of the bigger things that we saw in the physical assessment. And so now we'll look at the swing and we'll try to connect some of those dots to what we're seeing in the swing. So first I'll let it run full speed. Okay, there's the swing full speed. Now I'm going to go slowly through it, and we're just going to draw a couple of lines. The first thing I want to point out is what is called early extension. And so if I draw this line right on Pat's butt here before he swings, as I scroll through the swing, you will see on the backswing, he is moving forward away from that line. And if I progress further to impact, you'll see that we now have quite a big gap in between the initial line and this line. So there is a good bit of distance between the start and the finish in terms of where his butt is. This can lead to things like you can see he's kind of losing room for the swing. He's his hips are pressed up towards the ball. It really makes it hard to use leverage and have the club stay on a good plane. So this is probably one of the bigger issues. I think that this is due in part to, well, it's due to a variety of things. Number one, he's got the balance issues that we talked about. Number two, the limited internal hip rotation, both left and right, is making it harder for him to get into his right hip and then to get back into his left hip. So in an effort to look for power, he's kind of moving his hips towards the ball, which is a very common thing. The other thing that we talked about was Pat's limited external rotation of his shoulders. And so as he's coming down, you'll notice it's very hard for him to get his right shoulder turned outward. So like right here where you see his forearm is facing this direction. In an ideal swing, it would be a little bit more down here where this second arrow is. So if I draw a yellow line, ideally we would have his elbow a little bit closer to this particular line, which would then make it easier for him to get the club on a good plane coming down. Oftentimes when people have that limited range of motion, they use other mechanisms to plane the club, which Pat does in terms of lifting his shoulders up. So his right shoulder and his whole torso get very high here at the ball, in part because of that limited range of motion. So another thing that we're going to see here is because of Pat's wrist mobility issues, he has a hard time getting lag, and he often will cast. It's called casting. So that basically means you'll see this better from the other screen or the other view, face on, which I've done, but we're not going to show it here just for time purposes. But limited wrist mobility, you'll see Pat's wrists are very straight here. So casting or scooping would be there's a certain angle between Pat's hands and the club at this point. What you would like to see is that angle increase on the way down. So in other words, basically more wrist extension, or his wrist would kind of work backwards, which would allow the club to get behind him as he's coming down. What Pat does is he very much starts his swing from the arms instead of from the legs. So as he comes down, he's immediately kind of flinging his arms towards the ball. And he's not in a very leveraged position here, because if you notice, the club is not much behind his hands at all, and he is using quite a bit of his arms to power the swing rather than starting with his lower body and kind of getting momentum or lag behind it and then releasing that lag at the ball. Another thing to note with some of these swings, or with TPI in general, is that while some of this may be addressed to physical impairments or mobility issues, it's not all that. So there's also a component of simply understanding how to use the ground effectively, and that's where some of the swing drills can come in. So there's always this blending of understanding what somebody's doing from a physical perspective with what they understand about the golf swing and how they can actually work through things even with a certain level of mobility. And so I think another big thing to note here is Pat just generally isn't really using the ground much. He has a very arm-dominated swing. So I notice when he gets to the top, he's kind of loading into his right toe. So here, you'll see that his right heel is almost in the air, and the weight is very much on the ball of his right foot. Ideally, what we would like to see is the weight a little bit more in the middle back of his right foot and on the inside of that foot line. So we don't want the weight up on the toe. We want it more in the middle of the right foot, which then lets him push on the way down, which helps him open up the left hip. And instead, like I said, he's using very much his arms, and so you'll see at impact here, his hips are facing almost directly at the ball, instead of us seeing like mostly his like left butt cheek and having his hips facing more towards the target. Now, Pat's assessment screen did have actually pretty good disassociation between his lower body and his upper body. So this is not a physical restriction that I think is causing it in this particular case. This might be more of a technique issue, and that's something that we'll address as well. So all things considered, Pat's a really good golfer. He shoots generally mid to high 80s. He's been playing for about 10 years. Like I said, lots of different injuries that have impaired his progress at different points, but we have a kind of a clear picture on what he's able to do today. And like I said, in the next video, what I'm going to do is show the exercises that we've identified to help his mobility restrictions. And then in that third episode, we're going to show the screening or the swing videos or the swing tips that can help him address this stuff as well. So remember, with any TPI screen, it's a blending of things. You're going to do a physical assessment to understand what the person's able to do. Then you're going to try to help diagnose those physical impairments with exercises, stretches, strengthening exercises, etc. And then you're also going to look at swing drills to help correct some of the swing flaws, because just because somebody is unable to do something and or let me reword that. So you might see a swing flaw and not necessarily know a particular physical impairment or mobility restriction that's causing it. So there's always this, you have to understand that there's a general knowledge of the swing and ability to do certain things combined with the physical ability to do so. So we want to understand it from both those perspectives. And again, hopefully this is the first of many videos in which we can analyze a swing together and then look at the drills to work on it. So hope this is helpful. And like I said, more to come very soon. Thanks.